Putin, and I suspect his friends in Beijing, must have been truly stunned at what they ran into. Well-trained people. I understand the Brits did a lot of the training, so their chains of command worked better. If a senior officer was knocked out, the next knew what to do, right down to the common soldier, whereas in Russia you take the senior bloke out, no one else knows what to do. Then there's the technology of those Western weapons. We're all watching with enormous interest. I mean, you've got relatively modest weapons wiping out tanks and sinking capital ships. This must have been an incredible surprise to Putin. And does that make it even more dangerous in one way? Or does it mean that both the Russians and the Chinese are saying, well, the West's not quite as degenerate as we thought?
I don't know what Vladimir Putin's thinking. I think there are very few people in the world who know exactly what he's thinking. I think it seems to me, at least, that, as you know full well, every system of government has its strengths and weaknesses. One of the big strengths of an authoritarian system like the one that Russia has is the ability to plan long term, the same with Beijing. They're able to think 20, 30 years into the future and plan things and put things in place in a way that a democratic society simply is unable to do. But the drawbacks of that system, particularly where there's a single leader who wields complete authority over everybody in that country, is that they become someone that people are afraid to speak truth to. Speaking truth to power in a democracy means you might lose your job. Speaking truth to power in Russia means you might lose your head. And under those circumstances, what you create is a structure where people are being told, you are being told as the leader what you want to hear as opposed to what the truth is, which is why you saw immediately after the invasion, several of the key intelligence people under Putin being put under house arrest. And there's a lot of internal recriminations now happening in Russia because it's quite clear he was told a lot of lies about what would happen. He was told Ukrainians would welcome the Russian liberators. Well, that hasn't happened. It's happened the welcome has been rather different, and so on and so forth. So that's part of it. I think also we shouldn't underestimate the impact of morale on all of this. I'm not a historian, but from the history that I've read, for example, the Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union was extremely successful in the first year and a half of the war. And part of that was the Soviet soldiers didn't want to fight for Stalin, the man who just massacred and butchered and imprisoned their families. And so one of the things you saw is the soldiers unwilling to fight. Well, imagine that on top of that, you're being sent to a foreign country where you're supposed to do things and risk your life. We've seen quite a lot, I think, that the morale is not very high among Russian troops. If you know that your generals are the one who sold your rations off for money, and you are now having to raid Ukrainian supermarkets for food, I don't imagine that inspires a strong fighting spirit either. Whereas the Ukrainians, of course, are fighting to defend their homes and their land. So I think that's been a big difference as well. And as you say, we're seeing as well militarily, and I'm not an expert on it, but I think we're seeing that, if a handheld missile like a Javelin or an NLAW or whatever can take out a multi-million-dollar tank, and they are effective at doing this, that would suggest that the Ukrainians are going to be able to defend themselves more effectively than some people thought, perhaps.
Now, I see you as somebody who really understands the West and loves it, but the title of your book's very interesting, An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, coming up. And it brings to mind a saying that I heard someone utter the other day. Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I don't love you. Indeed, it might mean that I do love you. And what I hear is a tone of wake up in the West. You've been a great critic of wokeness. And perhaps you see that, and I certainly do, as a product of an indulgent society that hasn't been terribly realistic about the big challenges confronting it.
I think that's true, but I don't disagree with the West. I very much agree with the West and with the things that underpin it. And
that's my point.
Yes.
You're a great respecter of it.
Yes.
But as an outsider, we should honour the fact that it's often someone outside the family, for example, who can pinpoint, hey, listen, mate, you realise there's an area here that you need to think about because you're not helping your own family or whatever it is.
And look, there are plenty of people
And you say it because you care.
Absolutely, I do. And as you know, my wife's about to give birth to our first child.
Congratulations.
So, thank you very much. And you know, we mentioned Alexander Solzhenitsyn earlier.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he did, and he kind of, he turned a lot of people off in the West. When he came from the Soviet Union, he went to America, and he was perceived as sort of lecturing Americans about their moral decadence. And I'm not someone I'm not an outsider here to tell you how to run your country and run your life. I'm one of you now. Yeah. I'm here, and my children are going to live in this country, and that's why I care deeply about what's going to happen in this society. So all I'm trying to do is remind people of the things that underpin the values, the freedoms, the prosperity that we enjoy here. They didn't fall out of the sky, John, as you well know. Yep. They come from centuries of ideological discussion, of war. People have bled to make this country as prosperous and as free as it is. And I think we owe it to ourselves to not forget that and to remember the value of everything that's been created here. These are not accidents. It is not an accident that Russian people like Sergey Brin have to leave the Soviet Union with their family and go to America, and that's where they start Google. It's not an accident that people have to flee China and Russia and emigrate and build their businesses and create the things that they create elsewhere. These are not accidents. The West is not more technologically advanced by virtue of some kind of historical misunderstanding. There are reasons for that, right? And of course, part of that reason is Western countries have been dominant in the world. But another part is the system of government and the way that we do business in the West has facilitated that. And I don't want us to lose that. And I don't want my children to live in a society that falls behind. You know, this is one of the big concerns I have with many people in the West is we've been so successful in the West, we've been so comfortable in the West that we forget that at the end of the day, life is a competition. And there, as we talked about last time, when you interviewed me the first time, I made this point. People in Russia and China are not sitting around doing identity politics. As I said at the time, they're getting ready. And now you're starting to see, the Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, talked only days ago about how the purpose of what they're doing in Ukraine is to push America out of Eastern Europe, and it is to end the American global dominance in the world. That's what people want. And make no mistake about it, they're coming for what we have. And I've tried to make this point to people over and over and over again. We don't live in some magical rainbow-colored world in which everyone wants to live happily and trade and whatever. Yes, that's part of it. But there are a lot of people in the world who just want what we have. And they're coming.
Our Prime Minister deserves a lot more credit for his framing up of the very things you're talking about. He's talked about an arc of autocracy. And we need to be alert to that. And this is what's so valuable about what you're saying, because you understand what autocracy is like. You can see what we've got and why it's worth fighting for.
I feel that very strongly. I think it's really important. And you know, one of the things that I think it's very difficult not to take for granted things to which you've never experienced an alternative. If you've always lived in a prosperous democracy, it's like the sky. You don't expect the sky to fall down upon you, right? In the same way, you don't expect democracy to end. You don't expect your freedoms to be curtailed. But we've seen even over the last 2 years that softness that we've developed and that comfort causes us, I think, to be vulnerable. We are so attached to safety and comfort and stability that we will throw away our rights and freedoms when push comes to shove. And that worries me.
You touched on the fact that it took years, centuries, and bloodshed and a lot of deep, deep thinking and what have you to develop the institutions of freedom in the West. We're now very cynical about our leaders. That's dangerous. When we become cynical about the institutions, that's even more dangerous. I had a searing moment 7 or 8 years ago. I, through a charity I was involved with, embedded myself in a tertiary education institution in Myanmar, the old Burma. And after I'd been there about 3 or 4 days, I was about to leave, it was really noticeable, many of them, they saw me as some sort of quasi-authority figure. You know, I'd been something in a Western country and they were a bit wary of me. The sort of natural leaders in a class came up to me afterwards. You could tell they were the natural leaders. And their spokesman, a young man, looked me in the eye and he said, in terms of great exasperation, we'd just like to ask you, we think the generals, they were tragically wrong, are going to open up and we'll get some democracy. And he said, how do we build a democracy? How do we build a system of elections and what have you that work? How do we build a justice system? How do we build a welfare system? How do we build an education system? How do we build, fund, plan for infrastructure? And I thought, these are such big questions. And all I could say was it took us centuries to do it in the West. But we could throw it all away far too quickly.